because I heard about this man who needed to take a train to Philadelphia. So he went to talk to the conductor. You know, the conductor, the ticket inspector, the train. And he said to him, look, I'm very tired and I'm very sound sleeper, but I really need you to wake me up in Philadelphia. But this is the thing. You know, sometimes when I'm so tired, I don't want to get up, and I may even get violent. And who knows what I'm going to do, but please, I need to get off in Philadelphia. Sure. So the guy went to sleep. He wakes up. He's in New York City. He missed his stop. So he went to talk to the conductor, started yelling at him and telling him, like, well, you can imagine what he was telling to this man. He was so angry, so upset, and he leaves the train. Now there was another passenger that was witnessing all this, went to talk to the conductor. I said, my goodness, that guy was upset. I said, that's nothing. You should have seen the man we had to take out of the train in Philadelphia. He was upset. Now, I want to talk to you today about the greatest blessing of all. As I'm talking to you, please try to think, what is the greatest blessing of all? Specifically, what is the greatest blessing we can offer to somebody else? Because in the Torah, we read about multiple blessings. But this particular parsha contains quite a few. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But first, I want to remind you all that I don't know if you were aware that yesterday was a fast day in the Jewish calendar. You know that? Well, remember for next year. Okay? The 10th of Tevet, Asara Tevet, is a day of fast. What do we commemorate of that? We commemorate the siege of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Why is that so important? Because it was a 1, 2, 3 sequence of events. It started with the siege of Jerusalem. A year and a half later was the 17th of Tammuz, where that same army, it wasn't just about sieging Jerusalem, they breached the walls of Jerusalem, and 3 weeks after, Tisha B'Av, the temple was destroyed. But everything started with the Asara B'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet, where this was, the city was sieged. But what is interesting is that it wasn't an event that happened out of the blue. The prophets have been warning about this forever. The prophets have been rebuking the people of Israel that if they don't change, this is going to happen. Especially the prophet Ezekiel, he prophesied this, something like I was reading, 11 years before it happened. And then Zechariah was the one who wrote about this. And then Jeremiah wrote about the destruction of Jerusalem and so many other events that the prophets been warning the Jewish people that were going to happen if they continue with their lousy behavior. Which is interesting. Because of course they didn't listen. The people of Israel didn't listen to words of what the prophet had to say. But now, it was always like that. And I always wondered, why would God send all these prophets, one after the other, warning the Jewish people about the consequences if they don't change their behavior? Because nobody ever heard a word. They didn't listen to this man of God. With one exception, of course, that was Jonah. And we read that story on Yom Kippur, on Mincha of Yom Kippur. Why do we read it? Because he was the only prophet, the only one who was able to convince an entire city to change, to repent. And God spared that city. But other than that, all this rebuke never worked. In fact, the rabbis are already saying, the Talmud, don't waste your time rebuking people, because rebuke doesn't work. And the Talmud gives the reason why it doesn't work. It said, number one, nobody really knows how to give rebuke anymore. You know, mentioning somebody else's fault is not a guarantee that the person will change, especially if you don't know how to say those words, right? Have you ever tried to rebuke somebody else? Have you ever tried to tell somebody else that you don't like what they're doing? Can you remember what they told you? Probably the mildest thing is mind your own business. That's the mildest, okay? So the Talmud said, nobody knows how to rebuke anymore. Number two, nobody knows how to listen to rebuke anymore. Because if you're a smart person, if somebody comes to tell you that there is something that you're doing that is wrong, at least you should be humble enough to listen. Maybe the person is right. Maybe it's not. But you should approach it with humility, because maybe on that rebuke, there is something that it can change your life. But because the Talmud said, people don't listen. People don't know how to listen anymore. We get offended. We let our egos take the spot. So it doesn't work. And number three, the Talmud said, nobody has the moral stature to rebuke anymore. The sense that you will tell something to somebody else, who do you think you are? You know, do you know how many faults do you have? So that's why it's so difficult. And that's why I think virtually never worked. Now, which is interesting, is perhaps the mistake of all these people rebuking to the people of Israel was that they were pointing at their mistakes and not at their strength. Why do I say that? Because then we come to this week's Parsha and we find that Jacob is teaching us a completely different way to approach the same thing. We know that Jacob wasn't necessarily happy with some of the things that his children did. But nevertheless, he called them before his death to bless them. Actually, even before he blessed them, he blessed his grandchildren, Ephraim and Menashe. You know that. He said, Yesim Elohim ke Ephraim vehi Menashe. That is a blessing that we still use to the day when we bless our boys at the Shabbat table. Yesim Elohim ke Ephraim vehi Menashe. It's coming from this week's Parsha. But there was something very interesting there, and it's that, Ephraim was the youngest, Menashe was the oldest. And then the tradition is to put the right hand on top of the oldest and the left hand on top of the youngest. But Jacob crossed his hand. And he puts his right hand over Ephraim, the youngest, and the left hand over Menashe, the oldest. Remember what I told you before about all the fights during the book of Genesis? It was all about because one was the firstborn and the other one wasn't. And there was tension between them. So I'm pretty sure Joseph here was expecting a big fight between Ephraim and Menashe. And you know what happened? Nothing happened. Because these two brothers, I guess, they were mature enough to realize that it's not worth to fight for such petty things. And that was the strength that Jacob recognized on them right on the spot. So that's why Jacob told Joseph, this is going to be the way to bless our people for the generations. Letting them know that we have that greatness in us to be able to coexist without egos. We can do it if you come. It's in us. But then it comes when it says, Jacob said to Joseph, bring all your siblings, I want to bless them. But then if you go to the Torah, there is no blessing there. I know, this comes as a surprise for many people. When you go there, there is no real blessings. All what Jacob does is to mainly listing all the strength of each one of the tribes, with a few flaws that perhaps they can work on it, but mostly all the strength. And that was the most amazing blessing that Jacob can give them. Jacob is teaching us what is the greatest blessing of all. The greatest blessing of all is to be able to tell other people, to point out their greatness, all their strength, all the wonderful things they have, instead of wasting our time trying to rebuke for all the mistakes they make. This is something very interesting. It reminded me of a story. It's a real story that I heard many years ago from a rabbi. And he was saying that one day he was in Israel and he went to a falafel joint in Israel. And he recognized the man on the other side of the desk selling the falafel. Was one of his old yeshiva fellow students. He haven't seen this guy in ages. So, hey, Moshe, how you doing? I'm doing great. How about you? I said, I'm doing fine. I'm a rabbi of this congregation here, but the Moshe, I had to ask. I said, how come you're working here? He said, you were the best student of the yeshiva. You were so great that everybody was betting that you would be the next Rosh Yeshiva, the next leader of the generation. There is nothing wrong with what you are doing now, but we all thought that you were so amazing that you will be one of the greatest rabbi of the generation. So Moshe looked at his friend, opened his eyes real big, and said, well, nobody ever told me that. This is the most wonderful blessing that we can offer to somebody else. If you see greatness in a person, do like Jacob. Let them know their greatness. And you know why? Because when you let them know about everything they can achieve, you are unlocking the potential that perhaps was hidden. And now you are offering them the opportunity to achieve even more things on their life. Never keep a blessing to yourself. If you recognize that, let them know and unlock the greatness. And if you do that, the same way that you are able to see that, maybe they will be able to see it as well. Shabbat Shalom.